So in this video we're going to install and map a Link G4 ECU. This car is a Nissan Skyline R34 GTT and it has a RB25 Neo. So the customer's done some few modifications to it. We have a hybrid turbo of some sort, I'm not sure the exact specs of it, and some 600cc injectors, upgraded fuel pump, your typical sort of large exhaust and larger intercooler. So in order to calibrate all these modifications into the vehicle, the customer has a Link G4 plug and play ECU, which is 99% plug and play with a few little minor wiring tweaks to install it. So in the original ECU location down in the footwell, the original ECU circuit board has been removed from the original ECU casing and the Link G4 circuit board has been installed. And you can see it here on the screen. This is the Link G4 module we've got. And this basically pins up exactly to the factory loom and allows you to plug the factory loom into a Link G4 ECU. And the ECU board then fits in the original casing and mounts up in the original position. It's a very nice tidy solution and very quick to install. There are a few things that need to be done to make the thing work, and that is that the Link G4 cannot work a tune off of a MAF sensor. It has to know some sort of speed density or traditional fuel model. Now this means that while you can wire your MAF sensor in to read the value of it, you can't actually use it for tuning. So I have opted to do the modelled equation, which is a speed density equation, and in order to do that we need to have a MAP sensor, air intake temperature sensor, and to know the engine's volume, injector sizing and so on to calculate the fuel injection amount based on speed density. So the air intake temperature sensor has been installed as a fast response sensor just before the throttle body, and we have repurposed the original MAF wires for that. Now in some ECUs you can just literally use those three wires as a positive, a ground and a signal wire. In our case we're using just the signal wire and the ground because the MAF on the RB25 is a 12 volt MAF. And then what we have done is installed a pull-up resistor of 1K between a 5 volt line and the signal line just down the footwell and the loom there. So we've got our pull-up resistor because the MAF is wired into an analog voltage, not an analog temperature pin. So using an external pull-up resistor, we are able to use the analog voltage pin as a temperature sensor. Next we need is a manifold pressure source. Now the RB25 has a boost sensor that can read up to 1.25 bar, but this is a boost sensor installed to read boost, not manifold pressure. The difference is being that you're reading pre-throttle rather than post-throttle. So what we have done is taken the plug off that part of the loom and then pinned up our own Link 3-bar map sensor, and then plumbed the map sensor into the manifold to get both vacuum and positive pressure. So you can see this is what the ECU looks like just on the screen here, and that's what we've installed. I've also got somewhere the manual, and you see you'll get a nice manual with the ECU explaining how to go through the installation step by step. So just as I've talked about, it goes through how to actually install the ECU into the casing, and the sensors you'll need to install, in this case the MAP sensor and intake air temperature sensor, and there's also an expander connector to expose additional pins that aren't exposed through the factory pins. You'll need to install the Link software, and once you've done so, upload the base map relating to the engine or this plug and play ECU. In this case, this ECU only plugs into one engine. There are other models where you might have 2 or 3 engine options for that car, so you need to ensure you upload the correct base map from Link. Then it will take you through the steps of setting up your MAP sensor, your TPS and air temperature sensor calibrations, and then takes you through the steps of setting up any additional inputs and outputs you might have installed. Say you've installed a fuel pressure sensor or additional boost control solenoid or something like that. Finally, you need to set your trigger, and in this case we're using the factory Nissan CAS sensor, which is a cam-based crank angle sensor. And in order to do this we have timing lighted the engine with the timing locked to 10 degrees, and then verify by moving the CAS into position that we've got 10 degrees. We left the calibration alone on this one. In this case, in other ECUs you might have to make adjustments in the software instead. So once you've gone through all the things on the manual here and you're ready to fire ECU up and everything's pinned correctly, you can get your Link G4 software and you can connect your ECU. So you can see here we are now connected to the ECU. So starting at the top, we need to go through and validate that all our settings in our map are correct. Now the Nissan settings, or should I say the Link have done all the settings for this Nissan engine as part of their Nissan base map. So you can see here the ECU is already aware that we have a 6-cylinder engine, and we start at the top of the configuration tab here and go down. It's a 4-stroke engine. As we move down to the firing order, this is all getting been set by Link and is all correct. If you have this wrong, then your engine will spark and inject at the wrong time on the wrong cylinder, and that can end in a bad way. So you always ensure that you've got your firing order correct. And next we're going to move down to the fuel setup. So Link has 3 models available to you for fuel equation. In our case, we're using sequential injection because we've got all our injectors wired individually, not paired. So we've got 6 injector drivers, not 3, for example. So back to the equation. By default, the ECU comes in a traditional model, and the way the traditional model works is you have a master pulse, and then your fuel map is simply a percentage of that master pulse. I prefer to work in a volumetric efficiency method, so I've switched the ECU to what's known as the modelled equation. Now the modelled equation gives you a speed density setup, so you need to make some adjustments to your fuel map before you can start the car. The model multi-fuel is the same as model, but has the ability to run 2 blends of fuel, such as a flex fuel system, allowing you to run petrol and ethanol and have the system automatically adapt for you. So, moving down, because we're now in the modelled mode, a bunch of extra options will appear here. And what we need to do is teach the ECU about the size of the engine, the shape, the dimensions of the engine, and so on, how many cylinders, capacity. We also need to teach it about the volumetric efficiency, how well the engine breathes. That's done in the fuel map. We also need to teach it how to control its injectors and how to read its sensors. So here we can see that we're going to use the map sensor as our load source, and that is the access for our fuel table. If you were doing like a throttle body setup, you might use TPS. If you had an exhaust manifold pressure sensor as well, you might use engine pressure ratio of some sort. But in our case, we're just using the map sensor to reference the fuel table. So that is done here, load equals map. Next, we've got the engine capacity, again, all correct from the base map. This is the exact CC of your engine. Moving down, the fuel system type is a map reference fuel system. Now, this basically means whether you have a fuel pressure regulator that has a vacuum line connected to your manifold, so that the fuel pressure will always be 3 bar above manifold pressure. So right now, as we sit with the car engine not running, the absolute air pressure is 1 bar. The fuel pressure would then be set as 3 bar above that. As you idle though, you'll find the engine will drop the manifold down to maybe 0.4 bar pressure, which means the fuel pressure will drop to be 3 bar above 0.4. This keeps the injector size constant, so no matter what happens to the manifold, whether you're in boost or whether you're in vacuum, the fuel pressure is automatically adjusted to be 3 bar above. So between the front of the injector where the fuel comes out and the rear of the injector where the fuel goes in, the pressure difference is always 3 bar. If you don't have a map reference, you need to change your settings here to the appropriate fuel system you're using. So our base fuel pressure is set at 3 bar. We're going to leave these settings for default for now because we're using petrol. If you're using an alternative type of fuel, you would need to modify your fuel density and your stoichiometric ratio for the different type of fuel you're running. For example, if you're running this on pure methanol, you might have to put something like 0.78, 798 I think it is along those lines, or ethanol, might be that, one of the two, into your fuel density, and your stoichiometric will be something different, like 9 to 1, 7 to 1, or whatever you're using for your fuel. We're using petrol, so we're going to leave these alone. So once we've done that, we're going to move down to our injector setup. So we've got a set of 6 Deutschwerks injectors which are rated to 600cc. Now they come with a nice sheet in the box to tell you the exact cc of each individual injector and also the average flow of all injectors. So we're going to insert our average flow of all injectors to here, and what our actual fuel pressure was used to measure this flow rate. And so we install these details here. The next thing they give us is the injected dead time. Now this is an important thing to get right, because if your ECU is calculating an increase in density of 5%, it needs to increase fuel by 5%. And in order to do that, it needs to be able to adjust the amount of time to hold the injector on to get that response. Now, an injector, when it turns on, does not instantly start flowing fuel, and also when an injector turns off, it does not instantly stop flowing fuel. There's a delay time as the valve opens and closes. Now, this dead time will vary depending on the fuel pressure and the voltage applied to the injector. So we need to account for this dead time by allowing the ECU to squirt, you can see here, probably around between 0.7 and 0.5 milliseconds, depending on what the battery voltage is at the time. And this is an extra bit of time it adds on to its calculation of the fuel pulse to ensure that it's able to accurately adjust the effective fuel pulse, which is the amount of time that the injector is actually flowing fuel. So let's say we're running a 10-second injection pulse. We wish to increase the fuel by 5%. You'd add 5% to your 10, so you get a 10.5 millisecond pulse. And then you'd also add on the injector offset, so you get a total pulse of around 11 milliseconds. So it's really important you get your injector dead time right. If you've got injectors and you do not know the dead times, there are ways you can kind of estimate and calculate them, but the true best method is to simply take your injectors and send them off to a flow tester who will tell you the exact CC and dead time of your injector, and you can test them at multiple voltages and multiple pressures to give you a full data sheet for your injector. It's also good to know that all your injectors are matched together, because if one's not the same as the rest, you could have an extremely lean or extremely rich cylinder and not even know about it. So in our cases, we've also got fuel corrections here. We've got the air intake temperature sensor, for example, which has a correction table of its own. Now, if you're doing a traditional model, you would use this table to adjust for air temperature, but because speed density calculates the air temperature effect by itself, this table can be set to 0 or to be turned off. Moving down, we've got our closed loop lambda is currently off because we have not got our narrowband sensor or a wideband sensor installed on this ECU. The factory narrowband is currently removed, and we've installed the Dyno's wideband sensor into the downpipe. And the reason for this is that while you can measure at the tailpipe for full throttle runs, which is great for doing some tuning work, when it comes to idle and light cruising, you will not get an accurate reading of lambda at the tailpipe. So we've installed the Dyno's wideband into the downpipe. So moving down, injected timing. Again, this is the time or crank angle to inject the time, the injector, start injecting or end the injection at, and you can set various different options here, but the Link base map has already set this up for us. Moving down, so target lambda. Again, it's very important that we pay attention to this table, because the base fuel map is not an injection map. It is a volumetric efficiency map, which means it is used as part of the ECU's calculation to calculate air density. And the way the ECU does this is it uses what's known as the ideal gas law, which is pressure times volume divided by temperature divided by constant R. And a constant R is different for what gas you're doing, and there's a certain constant used for normal ambient air. So by inputting the pressure value from the map sensor, the volume of the engine, and the temperature from the intake temperature sensor, and the known standard R value for outside air, just air on Earth, it is able to calculate the density of a typical cylinder fill. So it knows 2.5 litres divided by 6 divided by 2, because it's a 4-stroke engine. It knows how much air is in each cylinder at the time, in theory. But engines are not perfect, and they don't always fill up to 100%. Depending what condition your engine's in, whether it's a high RPM, low RPM, high load, low load, the engine might not breathe what's known as 100% efficient. And this is where our volumetric efficiency table comes in. The base fuel map is a VE table. This will allow us to determine the amount of air in the cylinder. And once we've determined the amount of air in the cylinder, we can then determine the amount of fuel to mix with that air. So if we want an air-fuel ratio of 14.7 to 1, that would be lambda 1. If we wanted an air-fuel ratio of 11.8, that would be lambda 0.8. So knowing the injector size and knowing the amount of air in the cylinder, and then knowing the target lambda, the ECU is able to calculate on the fly the injection pulse required to mix that amount of air with the right amount of fuel to attain the target lambda. So it's very important that you set your target lambdas up right, and you're paying attention to your target lambda while you are mapping your base fuel map. If you have this set as lambda 0.85 and you're mapping to lambda 0.75, the calculations will not work out as things change. So air temperature changes, pressures change. If you just want to change your map slightly, or you want to change your AFR target, it won't work out. If you want to change your injectors, again, if your dead times are wrong, all this stuff only works out if the inputs to the calculation are accurate. So in order to do the fuel map, which is a bit down here, the fuel map will come from Link in traditional numbers, which might not be anything suitable to start the car in the modelled fuel equation. So, and this ECU, I'm pretty sure the numbers range between 15 and 45% of the master fuel pulse, which would not work because a VE table needs to see between roughly 50 to 100%. And this is how efficient the cylinder is being filled with air at any point. So, knowing that the maximum number before was about 40-45, and knowing that the maximum number a VE table should see, we can quickly convert our existing traditional fuel table into a basic starting point to get the car started by simply taking the entire table and then taking a calculator and taking the 105% max VE you might see with ram effect and the maximum number you see in your, say, your traditional fuel map, which in this case I think is about 45, and you can see here that we need to add 133% to the numbers. So if we grab our entire fuel table at 133%, we end up with something similar to this. And what you can see here is that we have peak breathing around just over 100% volumetric efficiency. Around the idle area we have 40 to 50%, and in the cruising and mid-range, you know, everything in between. This is because the shape of the traditional table is the same shape or surface area as the modelled version, but the numbers ranges are different. But simply by increasing the percentage, we can get the numbers boosted up to a number range that is suitable for volumetric efficiency, but keep the overall shape of the engine's breathing constant from the traditional map, and able to give us a starting point to get the engine running. So this is not, by all means, not a tune to drive the car on properly. It is simply enough to get the engine fired up, you know, move it off the ramp, get it into the car park overnight, bring it back in the next day, put it on the dyno. That's as far as this level goes. But it gives us numbers that will give us something that can start the car. If you try to run a model equation with 15 to 45% in your fuel map, there's a good chance your engine wouldn't even fire up. It would just too lean to even fire. So moving on, our ignition settings. So we have the dwell control table. Now this is the charge time for your coil pack, and there's various other settings you might need to play with in your ignition main. You can see in here relating to how your coil pack is controlled if you're using anything different than the factory coil packs. In our case, we are using the standard Nissan coil packs, so we're going to leave everything alone as it was set up by Link. The ignition table I've not touched yet. The ignition table is set up as it was by Link. Again, we'll need to go through this as we start to tune the car, but it gives us something to get the car started on. So moving down, we need to look at our auxiliary outputs. Now these are pins on the ECU that control something. So here we can see auxiliary 1 is controlled by controlling the boost solenoid. And in our case, we've removed the original factory boost solenoid and we've installed a Max style 3-port solenoid and plumbed that up to the actuator and the turbo. So you'll need to set the function of the pin and the frequency of the boost control solenoid. In this case is 33 Hertz. Auxiliary 2, for example, here is being set up as a fuel pump relay control. So this controls the original fuel pump relay and allows the fuel pump to turn on and off by the ECU. Auxiliary 3 is set up as a tacho, so this is already wired into the original factory dashboard and it allows a pulse signal to control the original needle to show the current engine speed. We've got idle control here, where the solenoid is pulsed at 200 Hertz to control idle, and various other things here. So one more thing to note is that the RB25 Neo is a variable valve timing engine. Now this is not a full variable valve timing in terms that you can set any offset degree on the cam you want. This is a simple on-off system that moves the cam from position A to position B. And as so, what they've done here in the base map is pin it up to an auxiliary output here, which is auxiliary 6, and set a number of conditions that will tell the ECU when it is suitable to switch the cam over based upon manifold pressure and engine RPM. Moving down, things like the check engine light are set up now, so there's a pin on the ECU that controls the check engine light. And if we move down here, we've got some digital inputs. We've got some inputs related to the AC requests, start position on the key, we've got power steering inputs and so on. Moving down to our analog inputs. Now these are the more traditional engine sensors that the ECU uses to control the engine. We have the original factory coolant temperature sensor here, and now this is pinned onto the ECU on AN temp 1. Now AN temp inputs are the same as an AN volt input, but they have a built-in option for a pull-up resistor, making them suitable for a temperature sensor. If you move down here to AN volt 1, you can see we're using that as our air temperature sensor, but it's what's known as a external pull-up. And that is because an AN volt, again, does not have a pull-up resistor. So we've used the original signal wire going for the MAF, and a ground wire that used to go to the MAF to wire up our air temp sensor. And then we have used a 1K pull-up resistor in the loom down by the footwell to join a 5-volt line to the signal wire. And then we've calibrated our AN volts as a IAT external pull-up. Now we know our pull-up resistor is a 1K, and we have a calibration table relating to here as to what resistance the sensor has at different temperatures. And the ECU can then use these values to calculate the temperature based on the sensor voltage input. So moving down, we've then got the map sensor here. We've had to calibrate our map sensor as a Link 3 bar because, again, we removed the original Nissan boost sensor and repurposed the pins for the map sensor. So we just pinned up our map sensor as per instructions, plugged it in, and then Link has a automatic calibration option here where you just choose Link 3 bar. Moving down, you can see that AN volt 4 is being used as a throttle position sensor. Again, we've not made any changes. This is exactly how Link set it up out of the box. So it just plugs into the original factory loom. One of the things you need to do is to make sure your throttle calibration is accurate. So you can see here that we have down at the bottom the current throttle position. If I move my foot on the pedal, I can go to 100% pedal and down to 0 there. So we've calibrated our throttle position correctly. You can see here the engine was started about an hour ago, and that the air temperature sensor that we have pinned up and calibrated is working correctly. And also our engine coolant temperature sensor is reading correctly here. This engine, again, was started an hour ago or so it should be nice and cool. Also, our map sensor here should be reading 100 or whatever your air pressure is at ambient based on your altitude when the engine's not running. If you've got some wacky numbers here like 120, 130, or you've got 80 or something, then you probably need to check the calibration of your map sensors, but not correct. In this case, you can see that we've got 104, and then that is an absolute pressure, and then there's also one below it here, which is the gauge pressure, and that is reading 3. So once we've got all these set up, we're happy that our engine dimensions are correct, our engine size, cylinder count, that our injectors are calibrated correctly, our fuel map, all our sensors are correct. We can get on and we can start the car in the next part of the video. Okay, so I've gone through our fuel map. I've done all the low load sites up to high RPM. It's time to start moving into some power runs and also to look at the ignition timing in a bit more detail. So I'm going to get ourselves moving, and I'm going to find ourselves a point in the ignition map and just demonstrate how you would do ignition timing through steady state. Kind of similar to how we did steady state fueling. You hold the car at a certain speed, certain load, and you just up and down the value until you get to the point you want to be at. Now, in air fuel ratio, the point you want to be at is when your air fuel ratio matches your target. In ignition timing, you're looking for the minimum amount of timing to make the maximum amount of output from the engine. If you go beyond the point where you're making the maximum output, you then need to bring the timing back to that point. Additionally though, you might notice I'm wearing some headphones because I'm listening to the sound of the engine. And in certain situations, you will not be able to reach the maximum brake torque or the minimum best timing, both acronyms for MBT, because you hit detonation or knock. And that is the sound that I will pick up by my ears, which is the combustion happening as a non-smooth combustion. So a normal combustion, the spark plug will fire, the flame will propagate smoothly out and press the piston down. In a knock event, under high pressure or high temperature, the spark plug will fire, the flame pump will start, but other parts of air-fuel mixture will spontaneously combust under the increased temperature and pressure. And when this happens, you get flame fronts colliding and pressure spikes at the wrong time in the cylinder. It's almost like smacking your piston with a hammer. This is to be avoided and not good because it will kill an engine. Later down the line, we can set up knock control on the ECU, where the ECU listens to the sensor itself and can pick up this event and back off the ignition timing for us. So I'm currently in our fuel map, and you can see I've completed most of the numbers in this area here, around here, and we're meeting our targets where appropriate. The top level of the map here is all full throttle, which we haven't reached yet. But let's move down to our ignition map. So let's pick a point, speed, lock our speed at say 40 something miles an hour. And let's pick this area of the map here, 80% on the engine load, or 0.8 bar absolute manifold pressure, around 2,500 revs. A bit more speed, a bit more throttle. Now let's grab this timing here and put in 10 degrees, for example. And if you look at the tractive effort output on the vehicle, which is the force at the tyre, you can see we're putting out around 190 something, maybe 200 pounds of force. And what we do is we can bring up our ignition timing to 15 degrees, and we can see that our tractive effort has increased to 240 pounds. Let's bring ourselves up to 18 degrees, and we're still seeing an increase of 260 odd now. We got to 20 degrees, and we're starting to see 275 pounds of force. Bring our timing up to 25 degrees, and we're now seeing nearly 300 pounds of force. That's more than a 50% increase in force or acceleration or power output of the engine at that point. So now we're going to bring it up to 30 degrees, and you can see the 5 degrees is giving us diminishing returns. We only picked up another sort of 8 to 10 pounds of force at that point, which means we're getting close to the optimum point. If we go to 25, we go to 35 degrees, again, another 5 degrees only picks us another 5 pounds or so. If we go to 40 degrees, you can see no increase in timing. We have basically found the optimum timing. So let's dial it back to say 38 degrees, and we're still sitting around the 315, 320 mark. So in that particular condition, 38 degrees is the maximum best timing. If we drop to this cell here, we know that 32 degrees, so we're making about 175 pounds. If we bring this up to 38 degrees, we pick up to 187 at peak. If we bring this up to 40 degrees, we're hitting 190, 45 degrees. We're getting a warning here because the maximum output the Link expects to do is 40 degrees. And you can see we don't really pick anything up. So in that situation, 40 degrees is good. So we can now take anything higher RPM and lower load and set that area to 40 degrees. Let's move up to 4,000 RPM. And let's bring our load up. Sitting around the 33 degrees. I'm putting out 280 pounds of force. Is there anything we have here going to 40 degrees? 287, 35 degrees, 282. We're pretty much going to say this area 38 degrees, 208, just under 290. So 38 degrees, this area here is adequate. We can carry this up to the top of the range. Another thing I didn't mention earlier in the video was that in Link, if you turn the ignition off, everything you have done gets lost. You must regularly store. I'm actually going to change that to 39 just to stop this little warning coming here briefly. So that's steady state ignition timing. So you can set yourself in an area of the map, 2000 RPM, let's say 80 load here. We're currently at 29 degrees. You can also use up and down functions to move the value, but you can just set, say, I don't know, 29 27 degrees. We lost some power there, a little bit, go up to 30 degrees. Picked up the same, 28 degrees. No real change between 28 and 30 degrees. So we can interpolate these cells here to where I was earlier, and we can just do a horizontal interpolation just to fill in these numbers to start with. And what you can do is you can just start doing various points in the map to get yourself ballparked to the right point, and then you can interpolate between those points, and then you can go over them again on the dyno and just dial in the ignition timing of each area you want to get the best response. Now, the more timing you have in the cruising parts of the map like I'm in now, 2000 RPM, middle load, it's going to improve your fuel economy, because using the same amount of air, the same amount of fuel, we're outputting more force or more horsepower. Well, that means you can start to accelerate, which means you can actually use less throttle to output the torque you need. By putting out less throttle, using less air and less fuel, you increase fuel economy. So by increasing the ignition time to the point that we find the optimum output for the engine in that condition, we can reach what's known as the maximum thermal efficiency of this engine. Now, as we start getting into the boosted areas, it is likely we'll be unable to get close enough to the optimum before we start hearing knock, at which point we have to back the ignition timing off by a safe window before knock to ensure that we don't encounter knock on the road. So let's say at a certain point in the RPM band on full boost, we're running 15 degrees of timing, and we see a small bit of knock in that range. We might bring the timing down to 12, maybe 10 degrees in that area, depending on how much safety barrier we want. If we're running a knock sensor, we might run to 12, 13 degrees, give ourselves a 2-degree window before knock. Being a bad batch of fuel might induce a bit of knock. We know our knock sensor is there to help us. If we're running without a knock sensor, we might choose to back right down to 10 degrees to give us a 5-degree window, to give us a more safety window to protect against knock happening, even with bad fuel or high temperatures. But we're going to sacrifice some power and some efficiency from the engine in doing so. So ignition timing is all about balancing between getting as much out of the engine as you can, but while maintaining a safe window to protect the engine from detonation or knock. Okay, so it's time to look at our fuel map again on full throttle. I've filled up the top of the rows up here into the manifold gauge pressure, and I've just copied and pasted up to give us some base numbers as a starting point. To make my life easier, I've also fixed up my AFR targets here as to what I want. What I'm probably going to do while tuning, I'm just going to set this to lambda 0.8, just so I know when I'm on boost. I only have to think about lambda 0.8. The higher boost levels than the car gets to run, I will run rich, so if we do an overboost, we're going to run nice and safe and nice and rich. But for now, while I'm testing on the dyno, I'm going to set all boosted areas to one target, so it's nice and easy for me to look at the graph, look at the map and know where I'm at. So, back to our fuel table. What we're going to do is we're going to do a power run, and we start ourselves around 2000 RPM, so I'm going to hit load on the dyno, and I can go full throttle, and the dyno will hold me, and then I will ramp up, and the dyno will start to accelerate and record the data. And there we go, we just hit the RPM limiter, let the vehicle slow down. Now I've converted the screen to AFR because I just find it easier to look at AFR on this screen. And we can see that from top end, from about 4,500 revs to about, I'd say it's 5.2, we're making a target, looking at an AFR of around 11.5. Now 11.5 is lambda 0.78, the target is 0.8. So 0.78 divided by 0.8, we're about 2.5% too rich. So we can say around this area here, we're making about 0.6 bar. So this area of the map here, from 4.5 to about 5.5, we're going to take 2.5% out. And then what we can do is we can interpolate between the maximum cells that I tested earlier. Just for now, right click, do selection, interpolate vertical, up and down. So these cells here now at approximate value. And we can go over these cells later again to start it all in. If find you go over it to get things roughly right, and then you go over and polish and go over and polish, and you get things dialed in closer and closer each time you go over it. So store again, right, 6,000 revs. We are sitting around, probably around 11.6 there. So let's convert from lambda to AFR, we can say 11.6 divided by 14.7 is a lambda 0.79. So we're at 0.79, we wanted 0.8. We want to take 2.5% off there. So we're close enough to that previous value again, so we can say this area here, and that trend carries on pretty much nearly to the RPM limiter, so we can actually take 2.5% off this entire region, which is minus 2.5%. And just at the limiter here, we're just dipping ever so slightly rich, so we'll take an additional 2% out here. This area of the map we can't reach because the limiter is currently set around 7,000. So looking a bit further down, around the 4,000 mark, this is where we're transiting and spooling up, so the AFR is going to change a bit. We're actually dropping down as low as 10.6 at 4,000 revs. And at 4,000 revs we were making about half a bar. So this whole region here, 4,000 revs, do 10.6 divided by 14.7, means a lambda of 0.72. 0.72 divided by 0. Target of 8 means we need to take about not a 10% out of this area of the map here. So again, I've only tuned from here to here, so we can do a vertical interpolation. Just also back here we can do a vertical interpolation. Now coming down to the 3.5 and 3.7 mark, they're both kind of even, again sort of 10.6, but the boost levels are different. So looking around here, the trend carries down to about 3.2, so we'll just do this area here, and we were around 0.2, 0.3 bar. So what was our target? Around 0.2, 0.3 bar, again just around the 0.8. So if we grab this area of the map here, we can say we were kind of at 10.6, 14.7, which is 0.72, divided by 0.8, again another 10% out of here. So again we can interpolate those rows as a vertical interpolation at 3,000 RPM, just on the positive pressure line, AFR target, and you can see we're being around just coming on to 0.85 lambda, and we're actually making like 11.6, 11.7, so 11.6 by 14.7, can't type that, 14.7. 0.78 roughly, 0.79, and so 1.79 divided by 0.85. So we need to take about 7%, 8.7%, 8.1%. Sorry, 7.1% even, should I say? Now, in this area of the map, we can literally grab this entire area, because this whole area here will never reach, and we can just take the 7% off there. Do ourselves a store, and what we can do now is go on to another power run now and see how our AFR has adjusted. There you go. So on the screen you can see the AFR and the solid line, the dotted line is the boost pressure. You can see where the AFR now is tracing a lot closer to the 11.8 mark where the target is set. Between the 3 and 4.5 we're still a couple % rich, so we can grab that area of the map again up to about 4. And we can pull another couple of percent off there, 2% or so. Store. But you can see as the AFR's come a little bit leaner, we've picked up a couple of horsepower as well. Just so you know, when this dyno is showing anything but the flywheel graph, it'll always show the max's power at the wheel. When I select the flywheel graph, it will change to flywheel power. So we're running along the 0.6 bar, well, actually more like we're on the 0.6 dropping to 0.4 bar range at the moment. So with that little tweak, let's just run it again.
To the change boost, not boost, excuse me, change boost to the approximate flywheel torque. We'll try a range of up to 500 maybe. Trying to get a nice range here that is easy to see. So here's our flywheel torque in a minute. And now we're going to move to our ignition map. So this is how we do full throttle ignition mapping. So we know we're running this area of the map here, and you can see the timing's being left quite flat by Link. So what we can do is literally take an additional 2 degrees in this area, and just run the car again, overlaying the previous graph to see where we pick up power, and also listening out for knock. Was around the 3000 revs and above, but we only increased a boost of 0.4 and higher. So if you look really from 4000 revs and above, you can see we picked up torque across the entire range there. So what we would probably look to do is add another 2 degrees in this area of the map and run it through again to see how much we increase by, if we increase. Here is good, so 26 to 30 down here. We can use some experience to know that we can probably put 2 degrees in this entire area now. So put another 2 degrees in this area. Let's see where we start to level off. Try and get the ignition curve to, rather than level off on the map, try to come up with revs. Because the higher speed the engine's running at, the more timing is needed to get to the optimal point. So we'll get to a point where we'll stop making gains in the mid-range and we'll keep making gains at the top end. So let's go for another 2 degrees. Changing the boost level, we've picked up another 40 wheel horsepower already just with ignition timing, so it goes to show how important ignition timing is. And this is something you just cannot do on a road tune, because you don't know what 1 or 2 degrees ignition timing at different points in the RPM band will do to the car. Yes, you can go out on the road, you can get some of your fuel map done, but as you saw with steady state, you can't get to every point in the fuel map, because you'll start accelerating, you'll start needing to use hills to get different loads on the engine. So a dyno makes your life so much easier being able to hold a car in a cell in a map. So we can hold the fuel still, we can hold the hold the car still to do the fuel map, we can also hold the car still to do the emission map. We can also do power graphing under high-low and actually graph the changes we make and see that the air-fuel ratio is staying constant, the cruise level is staying constant, but the torque is being increased purely by ignition timing. So, I mean, I'm kind of happy with a sort of 28 degrees down the bottom. I don't want to push it too hard. We're starting to see minimal gains around the 3.5, but then we haven't really added much timing there. So we could probably let's add a half degree there. And what we'll do is we will start adding half degrees. That's percentage. Undo. Change again, but what we'll do is we'll add another 0.5 here. We will add another 0.5 from here. Not percentage, 0.5. I'm just going to start making a timing curve that goes up just to see how the car reacts. 26.5 back in there. So I added a couple more degrees timing, but I've staggered it across the rev range now just to see how the car reacts top end. Listen out for some knock. We've added a good couple of degrees, and you can see how we've started to get a very small gain in terms of actual response from the car at the top of the rev range there, which suggests that getting towards this level of timing is getting close to optimum. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a tiny bit more at the high revs, so we're looking for another 0.5 degrees in there, 0.5. The other thing to note is at top end we're at 0.4 bar, so around here, and the mid-range are around here. So we need to be aware that if we start to add boost, our timing will drastically drop and we'll suddenly lose a load of power because our timing is very low. So let's have a listen and go again. And there we go. Put some additional timing in there and see next to no real gain now. So we're kind of at a point where there's no point chasing more timing and pushing the engine harder. We just leave the time in there because we're getting diminishing returns. So let's load that last graph up, graph 13. Excuse my keyboard, doesn't like to work to certain cars. So that's our flywheel torque, and if we get our flywheel power up as well, 400 for now. So we're making about 273 at the flies, and that's a 0.6 bar boost mid-range, 0.4 bar limiter. So now we've done our air-fuel ratio and our ignition time for that boost level, it's time to start introducing more boost to the engine. And by doing so, we can increase the boost pressure, i.e. the amount of air going in the cylinder, and therefore the amount of fuel we burn, and therefore the amount of energy we can release from the engine. So what I'm going to do now is look to pull the boost level up. We're currently running an open loop boost, so we're just going to lock the duty cycle to one setting just to see what we get. So we're currently on open loop boost. It activates over 1500 RPM and over 100 kPa, or point you transit to positive pressure. And so in the wastegates, we're going to have the wastegate duty cycle table here. We've got our throttle input here and the engine speed. And what I'm going to say is when we're full throttle, let's just run the boost controller at 20% and see what the boost pressure increases to. So while we're doing this test, let's get back to graphing our AFR and our boost pressure. And because we haven't gone to this boost level yet, we're just going to keep a good eye on our AFRs, make sure they're not changing, and also keep a good eye out for our knock. So here we go, load the car up. You can see the boost controller here is now at 20%. Saw very little difference there, but it's kind of being expected in some cases. Any of you who've seen the video on my Astra EFR will know how faulty boost control solenoids can cause you pain. So let's just try out to 30%, because much below 20% tends to give very little response on a boost solenoid. Another way to do it is also make sure we're seeing the wastegate duty cycle actually being outputted on the ECU, so let's add that to our monitor here, and we can make sure we're actually putting a duty cycle out. So let's get to 2000 RPM, load, stamp on the pedal. Yes, we are outputting 30%. Let's see if our boost increases. No. So, we have a problem to diagnose before we can carry on mapping. We haven't got any output from our boost control solenoid. The ECU is outputting, we can see it here, but the boost is not reacting, so we need to check out the solenoid plumbing, make sure the solenoid's wired correctly, make sure the solenoid's actually working. After wiring the ECU, we did test output the solenoid by setting the entire table to 50%, and we were able to hear the solenoid clicking. So we need to investigate what's going on before we can carry on with mapping. But I hope that gives you an insight on how fuel mapping is done and how ignition mapping is done, and a very brief oversight on how to use the Link software.